Hi, boys and girls. Today is chapter 10 from The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. The dot that became a speck, that became a blob, that became a figure, that became a boy. The walk along the fence took Bruno a lot longer than he expected. It seemed to stretch on and on for several miles. He walked, and when he looked back at the house he was living in, it became smaller and smaller until it vanished from sight altogether. During this time, he never saw anyone anywhere close to the fence, nor did he find any doors to let him inside. And he started to despair that his exploration was going to be entirely unsuccessful. In fact, although the fence continued as far as the eye could see, the huts and the buildings and the smokestacks were disappearing in the distance behind him, and the fence seemed to be separating him from nothing but open space. After walking for the best part of an hour and starting to feel a little bit hungry, he thought that maybe that was enough exploration for one day and that it would be a good idea to turn back. However, just at that moment, a small dot appeared in the distance, and he narrowed his eyes to see what it was. Bruno remembered a book that he had read in which a man was lost in the desert, and because he hadn't had any food or water for several days, he had started to imagine that he saw wonderful restaurants and enormous fountains. But when he tried to eat or drink from them, they disappeared into nothingness, just handfuls of sand. He wondered whether that was happening to him now. But while he was thinking this, his feet were taking him, step by step, closer and closer to the dot in the distance, which in the meantime had become a speck, and then began to show every sign of turning into a blob. And shortly after that, the blob became a figure. And then, as Bruno got even closer, he saw that the thing was neither a dot, nor a speck, nor a blob, nor a figure, but a person. In fact, it was a boy. Bruno had read enough books about explorers to know that one could never be sure what one was going to find. Most of the time, they came across something interesting that was just sitting there, minding its own business, waiting to be discovered. Such as America. Other times they discovered something that was probably best left alone, like a dead mouse at the back of a cupboard. The boy belonged to the first category. He was just sitting there, minding his own business, waiting to be discovered. Bruno slowed down when he saw the dot that became a speck, that became a blob, that became a figure, that became a boy. Although there was a fence separating them, he knew that you could never be too careful with strangers, and it was always best to approach them with caution. So he continued to walk, and before long, they were facing each other. "Hello," said Bruno. "Hello," said the boy. The boy was smaller than Bruno and was sitting on the ground with a forlorn expression. He wore the same striped pajamas that all the other people on that side of the fence wore, and he had on a striped cloth cap on his head. He wasn't wearing any shoes or socks, and his feet were rather dirty. On his arm, he wore an armband with a star on it. When Bruno first approached the boy, he was sitting cross-legged on the ground, staring at the dust beneath him. However, after a moment he looked up, and Bruno saw his face. It was quite a strange face, too. His skin was almost the color of gray, but not quite like any gray that Bruno had ever seen before. He had very large eyes, and they were the color of caramel sweets. The whites were very white, and when the boy looked at him, all Bruno could see was an enormous pair of sad eyes staring back at him. Bruno was sure that he had never seen a skinnier or sadder boy in his life, but he decided that he'd better talk to him. "I've been exploring," he said. "Have you?" said the little boy. "Yes, for almost 2 hours now." This was not strictly speaking true. Bruno had been exploring for just over an hour, but he didn't think that exaggerating slightly would be such a bad thing to do. It wasn't quite the same thing as lying, and it made him seem more adventurous than he really was. "Have you found anything?" asked the boy. "Very little.